The source of Islamic history is these books, Tarikh-i-Tabar by Ibn Asir, Kathir, and Ibn Khaldun, and many more. All over the world, these books are considered the history of Islam. But in my opinion, the bigger question should be, what is the source of these books of the history of Islam? And all these big books will come to an end. The story of these books and the scholars who wrote them is very interesting. 14 years ago, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his first caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, and Ali, may Allah be pleased with them, did not receive any history of Islam because there was no need to write it. Most of the companions were still alive, and they already knew the entire history of Islam. But gradually, as the companions left the world, the new generations of Muslims began to forget the history of Islam, including battles like Badr and Uhud and some young people, leaving the heroes of Islam like Khalid bin Walid and Ali, may Allah be pleased with them, began to forget the history of the Roman and Persian empires. Heroes began to impress every generation with their heroes and heroes. Now, for the first time, a great caliph of Muslims, whose name was Umar bin Abdul Aziz, started the work to remind the young generation of the heroes of Islam. Umar bin Abdul Aziz, when he became the caliph, called Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, a great scholar of that time, to him, and ordered him to go everywhere and give lectures to the Muslims about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, during the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, the last few companions of the world were alive. So Ibn Shihab learned about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from them, and started teaching it to his students so that future Muslims would not forget our great heroes. Two of his students are known to the whole world today, Ibn Ishaq and Imam Malik, after whom Ibn Shihab wrote the first book on the history of Islam. But as soon as he completed this book, Caliph Umar bin Abdul Aziz was martyred. It was given, and after the martyrdom of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, just 30 years later, the entire Umayyad government collapsed, and along with the Umayyads, the naval books of Islamic history written by Ibn Shihab disappeared from the world. Now, the Umayyads were destroyed from the world, but after that, a new caliphate began in the world, the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, the Abbasid Caliphate also had many shortcomings like the Umayyad, but they had one thing that no one could deny. The Abbasids loved knowledge so much that they would go to any extent to achieve it. An Abbasid king ended a huge war with the Roman Empire just in exchange for a book by Plato. And the king of the caliphate, Mansur, destroyed the Umayyad capital and built a new capital of Muslims in the world, Baghdad, and inside it he built the largest library in the world, which is now called Baitul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. This library was built by the Abbasid king Mansur ibn Shihab al-Zuhri. He called the student Ibn Ishaq to him and ordered him to go and write a book on the history of Islam again. But there is no such book. It should contain the history of the entire world from Adam, peace be upon him, to me. Ibn Ishaq did exactly that and wrote the first complete history of Muslims on Mansur's orders. It was not a book of hadith, but a book of history. But today, this important book of Ibn Ishaq has also disappeared from the world. But now we have to think about why all these books were disappearing from the world. Until now, Muslims did not know the technology of paper. And all these books were written on a very expensive material of the old days, papyrus, which Muslims used to make by combining these small leaves, which was a very difficult task compared to paper. At that time, paper technology was only available in one country in the world, China, far from the Muslim caliphate. The Chinese kings had hidden this paper technology from the whole world. But soon all this was going to change because the Abbasid Caliphate came. Shortly after, the biggest war between the Muslims and the Chinese Empire took place, in which the Muslim army easily crushed the entire Chinese army and took thousands of Chinese soldiers as prisoners. Where does it go now? Among these Chinese prisoners, there were some people who knew the technology of making paper well. From here, Muslims started learning the technology of making paper from these Chinese prisoners for the first time. At first, Muslims did not know its importance. But then, the greatest king of the Abbasid Caliphate came, whose name was Harun Rashid. Harun Rashid knew the power of paper technology very well. That is why he built the world's largest paper factory in Baghdad, with which a new era began in the world, which people remember to this day, Islamic Golden Age. In the era of Harun Rashid, right next to the House of Wisdom, thousands of papers were made daily using a water machine. It was the largest paper factory in the world, and it was so big that the first paper factory in Europe was built 300 years after the Muslims. Now, due to this paper technology, the tension of books disappearing had ended because whatever book was written in the House of Wisdom was copied in the same paper market and spread all over the world. That is why in the Islamic Golden Age, scholars everywhere started writing thousands of books, many of which are still in the world today. It is said that scholars were respected as much as Ronaldo or Messi. In any Golden Age, 6 big books of hadiths like Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim were written. But still, a big problem was that due to the disappearance of Ibn Ishaq's book, there was no complete book on the history of Islam. Now, seeing this, Ibn Hisham, a student of the same Ibn Ishaq, once again revived Islam. He wrote a book on the history of Islam, and due to the technology of paper, this book of Ibn Hisham is still with us today. In fact, you can easily find the new version of this book anywhere. It is the oldest book in the history of Islam. Now, after Ibn Hisham, books on the history of Islam started being written everywhere, in which the book of the next history of Islam was written by Al-Waqidi. This is what was written. But today, many scholars do not understand some of the things of Waqfi correctly. After that, a student of Waqfi also wrote a book, Tabaqat ibn Sa'd, in which he wrote the stories of all the companions. And finally, in the same period, a book was written that if you know even a little about this dramatic history, then you must have heard the name of this book. And the name of this book is Tarikh al-Tabari. This is Tarikh al-Tabari, who was a great scholar of the Islamic Golden Age, and used to teach students in a school in Baghdad for a salary of 10 dinars. But slowly, when Imam Tabari's intelligence was discovered, it is said that once his peace was pleased, and he placed a treasure of gold dinars in front of him, but Imam Tabari took only his 10 dinars from it and said, "This is my salary, I will not take a penny more than that." In this book, Tabari wrote about all the events from Adam, peace be upon him, to the Abbasid Caliphate. Apart from him, there were many other scholars. But here we are only discussing those who wrote great books on the history of Islam. The history of Tabari was the last great book of the Abbasid Caliphate, because after that, the old caliphate slowly started weakening. Finally, the Muslims became so weak that the Pope of Europe took the biggest advantage of it and gathered the Christians of Europe and attacked the Muslim Palestine and occupied Jerusalem. But even after the conquest of Palestine, just like today, the Muslim leaders did not care. The dream of reconquering Palestine was more in the hearts of the scholars of that time than the Muslim kings, the greatest of whom was the name of Imam ibn Asakir, who was such a great scholar that he had 70 volumes of just one book. Imam ibn Asakir used to teach the history of Islam to the students of Damascus and kept telling them that one day the Muslims would definitely conquer Palestine again. One of the same students of Imam ibn Asakir went ahead and conquered Palestine, whose name was Salahuddin Ayyub, may God bless him and grant him peace, who was heading towards Palestine with an army of 200,000 to reconquer Palestine. At that time, a very strange book was written in Baghdad called Fazail Yazid. In this book, Yazid was presented as a great hero of Islam, and it was shown that there was no one more righteous than Yazid. This book became so famous that some Muslims actually began to consider Yazid a hero of Islam. But as soon as the news of this book reached the most, she reached the great Sunni scholar Imam ibn al-Jawzi and began to fear that the Muslims might go ahead and consider Yazid a hero of Islam, after which Imam ibn al-Jawzi wrote a huge book to expose the truth about Yazid to the world and expose Yazid forever. Now, while all this was happening, Salahuddin Ayyubi finally conquered the entire Palestine and hoisted the flag of Islam on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, due to which the whole world remembers Salahuddin to this day. In this army, there was also a great scholar, Imam ibn Asir, who, along with fighting, wrote a huge book on the history of Islam. This is his book, in which he wrote the story of the wars of Salahuddin, as well as the first Muslim king to attack India, Sultan Shahabuddin. This means that during Ibn Asir's reign, Muslims were winning in Palestine and India everywhere. But at the very end of this book, the time of the real destruction of Muslims begins. And the name of the king who destroyed Muslims was Genghis Khan, Salahuddin Ayyubi. After a short time, Genghis Khan started moving towards Muslim areas from Mongolia and started running every Muslim city one by one, and while conquering these areas, it is said that Genghis Khan's grandson Halaku reached Baghdad, the center of the Islamic Golden Age. It is said that at that time, the Islamic Golden Age had deteriorated so much that people, leaving science and knowledge, were arguing with each other about strange things. That is, when Halaku Khan was moving rapidly towards Baghdad, Muslims were arguing about how many angels can sit on the tip of a needle, what kind of bread did Jesus eat, and of course, they were busy in Shia-Sunni debates. Halaku Khan's army entered Baghdad, and, without looking at the Shia-Sunni, considered everyone to be Muslims and beheaded them. It is said that Halaku Khan killed so many Muslims in Baghdad that the color of the river in Baghdad turned completely red for several days because of the blood of Muslims. Finally, after killing everyone, Halaku Khan's army reached the door of the House of Lists, the world's largest library, and set it on fire, destroying all its books. They threw the books into the river, and there were so many of them that due to the ink of these books, the river of Baghdad turned black for several days instead of red. Then Halaku Khan set fire to all the paper factories in Baghdad, and thus the Islamic Golden Age ended and the 400 years of hard work of the Muslims. The river of Baghdad was flooded, and the Muslims became so weak that even the Muslim scholars did not have paper to write with. Due to this, the Muslims started ordering paper from Europe for the first time, which caused the production of paper in Europe to skyrocket, and for the first time, the Christians of Europe started making more paper than the Muslims. Now that after the destruction of the Mongols, there was a despair in the entire Muslim world, and many books of science and history were destroyed. During this period, the greatest book on the interpretation of the Qur'an and the history of Islam was written, the name of which most every Muslim must have heard, and the name of this book is Tarikh ibn Kathir. The original name of this book is Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya, in which he wrote every detail from the beginning to the end, from Adam, peace be upon him, to the Day of Judgment. After Ibn Kathir, another great Muslim scientist wrote a book on the history of Islam, which some people consider to be the last great scientist of Muslims, whose name was Allama ibn Khaldun. This is his book. The first volume of this book is still taught in universities like Harvard and Oxford. In fact, a great university has been built in Turkey in the name of Ibn Khaldun. Some scholars consider Ibn Khaldun to be the last great scholar of Muslims, because after the destruction of the Mongols, the Muslims in the world were now making the most paper, not just the Christians of Europe. And in the year that Ibn Khaldun died, a man was born in Europe who invented a machine that shook the world, the printing press. From then on, Europe slowly started writing millions of books, and this printing press was such a powerful machine that earlier a person used to write 40 pages a day. Now, because of this printing press machine, he started printing 4,000 pages every day, which of course Europe slowly started to get ahead of the Muslims. And now, during this printing brace, a new superpower had become in the Muslim world. The Ottoman Empire and the Ottoman Empire saw this and made a decision which is considered their biggest blunder till date. The king of the Ottoman Empire and the scholars together made a very strange announcement, that this machine printing press was forbidden for Muslims, and that was because some scholars said that knowledge can only be obtained from the pen and not from machines. Some said that this is a Christian invention and it should be forbidden, and some scholars were afraid that if every Muslim gets a book in his hand, then what will happen to us? Now, on one side, Europe has 1,000 printing presses, and on the other side, there is still zero meaning in the Muslim world. He could only write 40 pages a day, while a Christian in Europe could print 4,000 pages a day. Of course, the decline of Muslims began from here, and Europe began to rise. Muslims, abandoning knowledge and science, started building big buildings like palaces, and Europe also started building universities and libraries, due to which, instead of Ibn Khaldun and Al-Biruni, the world's great scientists, Newton, started being born in Europe. Finally, 300 years after the printing press of Europe, the Ottoman Empire realized what a big mistake they had made, and 300 years later, the Muslims built their first printing press, but it was too late now and to this day. Muslims have not been able to raise their heads in front of Europe again.